This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hello and welcome to Exvangelical, a show exploring the world inside and outside the evangelical subculture. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. Today's guest is Gloria Beth Amodeo, and we're going to discuss her book, God's Ex-Girlfriend, a memoir about loving and leaving the evangelical Jesus. Before we get to the interview, though, I do want to apologize for the unannounced hiatus to the feed here, as I shared over on the Post-Evangelical Post, my Substack publication. That has been for a wide array of reasons, and will continue for about another week or so. I have a scheduled vacation next week, and then there's some other family and work commitments that are taking the majority of my time at the moment. And I know I've never been the most prolific content creator, but please bear in mind that in addition to this work, writing and podcasting, I do have a full-time job and family obligations, and I'm working on my book. I do want to thank you for listening to this show and for continuing to listen to the show, even when my publication cadence becomes erratic. This is just part of the life, really, of being an independent creator, is sometimes things that are beyond our control really interfere with our publishing schedules. I do have a whole stack of books that I hope to interview the authors of, as well as a whole host of other things that I plan to write on the Post-Evangelical Post, as well as I'm laying the groundwork to start publishing more video, either on TikTok and Instagram or on YouTube, and co-publishing the same feed elsewhere. But I would really love for your assistance if you are able to offer it to help make those things sustainable and real. And I do recognize that asking for subscriptions does sort of invoke the same type of latent memory and perhaps even trauma from church spaces where some white guy is asking for money from you. In order to offset that, and in order to be in compliance with my own ethics and desires, I have set up a reparative business model through the Post-Evangelical Post, where I donate 25% of net proceeds, so things after Substack costs and things like that, and processing fees, to two organizations that serve populations that have been harmed by white evangelicalism. That is White Homework, the anti-racism group that is run by Tori Williams Douglas, as well as the Religious Exemption Accountability Project, which is filing a class action suit and representing queer students who experienced trauma while at Christian colleges. Both organizations are wonderful, and I donate 25% of those net proceeds from those direct subscriptions to those organizations. And you can support this work, and by extension, the work of those two organizations, for just $5 a month over at postevangelicalpost.com. That is hosted on Substack. If you're curious why I choose Substack over Patreon, it's just a matter of me also working as a writer, and it just has a few more features and also allows me to walk away from Substack if I ever need to. Patreon actually maintains all of the relationships with the customers, and Substack gives me a little more independence as an independent producer. I know this is a longer sort of introduction than I generally do, but I felt it was appropriate to take the time and ask for your support if you're able to give it. If you're not able to do that, you support on an ongoing basis. You can also purchase merch or leave a PayPal donation. You can find all of that information over at postevangelicalpost.com/support. And you can find all the various options of how to support the show, including just leaving a review or letting people know about the show. We are rapidly approaching 1 million lifetime downloads for this show, which I am extremely proud of, especially as being an independent producer with no institutional support, no ad spend, none of that. This is something that has been maintained strictly by my desire to keep it going, and I'm extremely thankful for that. Gloria Beth and I had a great conversation about her book, and I'm very excited to share it with you. As I mentioned, I do have a planned vacation for next week, but hope to be sharing more episodes with you in the near future. One final way that you can support this show is by going over to bookshop.org and purchasing Gloria Beth's book from my affiliate page. There will be a direct link to that in the show notes, as well as into the Post-Ev Post entry about this episode. And bookshop.org is a wonderful organization that if you like to purchase physical books, it is a wonderful alternative to Amazon. And by supporting them, you support by extension me. I get a little bit of an affiliate referral bonus if you purchase the book through my link. You can also find the links to every single author that I've talked to on the show and 2 copies of their book on my bookshop.org page. Folks that have appeared on both Exvangelical and Powers and Principalities. Interviewing authors has become one of my favorite things to do on this show, and any way that you can directly support them, I am very thankful for. So let's get right to this episode with Gloria Beth. Hello and welcome to Exvangelical. My guest today is Gloria Beth Amodeo, author of the new book, God's Ex-Girlfriend, a memoir about loving and leaving the evangelical Jesus. Beth, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. We've sort of known each other through the internet as things are these days for several years, and was very excited to read your book and excited to talk to you about it today. As you may know, I like to start at the start on this show, and your book is a memoir. So a lot of times this show is very much just about people's lives and how they interact with the evangelical church. And yours is a very interesting and compelling story because you came to this weird world of evangelicalism at a different stage in life than some folks who may have been raised in evangelicalism. But if you could just talk a little bit about your upbringing, which I know you started in your book by talking about having been raised Catholic, but then being exposed here and there to evangelicalism along the way.
Yeah. My upbringing was like very, I would say, and I talk about this book, like it was very sort of like cafeteria Catholic. Like my parents are like, we're going to take the things we like and we're going to leave the things we don't like, sort of like the evangelicals' number one complaint about Catholic people was like my upbringing and my parents. They're like, you can't pick and choose, even though they totally pick and choose. But
right.
The Catholic Church was, the way my parents did it, they were just like, we pick and choose and we love picking and choose. And it was like a very and also like the Catholic Church that I grew up in, also at the time it was a very sort of progressive Catholic church. Like my priest gave communion to gay people. Like there was like I remember not even knowing that was like an issue. I'm pretty sure my priest also, I think in the Catholic Church you're not supposed to give communion to people who've had a divorce unless they've had an annulment, and my priest didn't even like follow by that at all, like when I was growing up. So it was like I don't know, it was Catholicism in that we went to church and it was boring and I didn't have like any fun there. But it was still like a pretty like nebulous upbringing, I would say, in terms of like spirituality. But as I was growing up, also there, wasn't like a very big distinction for me, at least in my understanding of what evangelical Christianity was as compared to what I was like as a Catholic. Like to me, it was just all Christian. Like everyone's a Christian, and like we all fall into the same boat. Like we all love the same God or whatever. We all believe in the same Jesus. Like I didn't understand that there were levels. I didn't understand that whole idea of fundamentalism. And like the progressive line. So I remember, like growing up and being a little girl and having like a friend who was like, she was like, I, believe in God too, and I love Jesus, and like I'm glad you love Jesus too, because that means we won't go to hell. And I was like, what do you mean people go to hell? And it's like having her explain that stuff to me and talk about the Left Behind books and the rapture, about how I should really read those Left Behind books because they're really good and will explain to me what's going to happen to me if I don't, like, all of that stuff. Like, and I remember being very frightened by all of that. Like, and there's a scene in my book where I go to church with her, and that's when I'm first like introduced to it, and I'm very frightened by all of it. Like, I found evangelicalism as a child when I first started learning about it to just be terrifying. Like, and it's really like something that I think now as a adult I look back on, and I look at like people who like grew up in it, and I feel so sad that like it's like what it must have been like to get those messages and then to come home to your parents and have them tell you that like that was true and that like you had to live life in this way.
Mm-hmm.
I found it terrifying. And even when I was then an adult teaching children's church, I remember feeling uncomfortable with teaching children about that stuff, like doing it
Mm-hmm.
because I believed it was real, but at the back of my head, like feeling like there's something wrong with this. There's something wrong with telling a child this, like,
Right.
um, and so it's a very, yeah. So my upbringing was like very not evangelical and very sort of opposed to evangelicalism, to the point that when I was introduced to it, like I found it strange, but still didn't quite understand that it wasn't that my Christianity and evangelicalism's Christianity wasn't the same Christianity. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't
Mm-hmm.
know how to look at evangelicalism. I didn't know how to detect it, how to view fundamentalism. Like no one had given me those tools, because I just don't think those tools are like readily available in our society. I don't think we have tools to like, help people understand like, oh, that's a fundamentalist. Like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, absolutely. Just because, I mean, people sort of practice their religion in so many various ways, and it's not until you get into sort of a study, like more of a scholarly study of religion, that you're going to hear language about things like there being multiple Christianities and multiple
mhm,
expressions of Christianity. And I
yeah,
like the expectation that children should know that is unrealistic, right?
yeah.
Like you
And
just
it's
have,
really confusing.
it's all by circumstance of your birth.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, exactly. And it's super confusing for kids, I think. Like, and I
mhm.
found it really confusing, like for me as a kid, to like, your frontal lobe's not even developed. Like so many parts of your brain aren't developed. And then all of a sudden you have like friends and teachers and all of these people who are evangelical coming up to you and being like, your understanding of Christianity isn't the real Christianity, and you respect these people and you love these people. They're a part of your life. And then having your parents be like I don't know, like those juxtapositions, they didn't make any sense to me as a child. And it wasn't until I was a teenager and in my late teens, early 20s, that I started to be able to understand them, but like in a very
Hmm.
different way.
Right, right. All that being said, you all like it also appears that your household and your parents were open to various types of spirituality, but
Mhm.
they did draw this distinction between the type of fundamentalism that you would eventually become attracted to
Mhm.
and practice, and their own sort of individual spiritualities that, as you said, they sort of would be a pick and choose and bring their own experience to bear. Could you talk
Mhm.
about that and how that was a presence in the way in which you talk about your mother, for example, being open and having an experience of seeing a sibling who'd passed and that sort of
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah. When I was growing up, my mother was very much like, it was really beautiful the way my mom saw like the idea of life after death. And it was actually very comforting to me. Like when I was little, my mom was always like, I've seen people who have died before. I've been with people as they've died. I know it's peaceful. I know it's good. Like death is not a bad thing. Like, it's like it's a hard thing, but it's not a bad thing. And they're still here. And she was very adamant about that, because when I was growing up, she told me that when she was little, her brother had died of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma when he was 11 and
Mm,
she was 7. And
mm.
I love this story. It's like a ghost story. Ooh. Like she actually said that she right at the time that he died, she saw his spirit walk into her classroom, and she was at school, and she could completely see through him. And he sat on her teacher's desk, and he mouthed words to her that she couldn't hear, but she could feel in her heart that he was okay. Um, and then as she was walking home from school that day, I guess her grandmother had gotten her, and she was like rushing her home from school because, you know, her brother died. And my uncle was apparently following behind her, still see-through, throwing a football up in the air and catching it. And that was, and I remember her telling me about that when I was little, and I found it so comforting, and she got a lot of comfort from it too. And so she always told me that, like, you know, it's like, you don't have to be afraid of death. I know where people go after they die. I know that they're okay. Like, and that sort of, like, in a way, just opened up this whole idea to me about, like, angels and demons and heaven, and like, and just like, you know, the beauties and the glories of heaven being like a real place, and of spirits and life after death being like a real thing. And she was just so, like, she was so open to all of it. And, you know, when you're a little kid, like, you just mirror what your parents do, and you mirror what your parents say. And so to me, in my mind, there was like a whole nother world other than the world in front of me. Like, I was always like very, I don't know if I would say aware of that, but I was very cognizant of that, like very like in tune with the idea of there being like a spiritual realm. I didn't know the laws of that spiritual realm, but I assumed they were pretty like benevolent, you know, because to my mom, like, they were very benevolent. So yeah, so I was very, so I grew up in an environment where people just kept telling me that, like, what my mom was saying wasn't true. Like, all of these like weird people would come in my life, and like really evangelicals now I know would come into my life and tell me like that there were laws that, like, you know, that world abided by, that did not like follow my mother's definition. But I believed my mother's definition because she was my mom and she created the world for me. So
yeah, and that's great that you had that sort of expansiveness. And it's sort of what your book conveys is that expansiveness, like, you were receptive to it because you were a very imaginative child. And I was also that sort of kid, especially very young. Like, there's stories of me, for example, like, if I was pretending to be Batman or some other character, like, I wouldn't respond to my name. I would have to be addressed by the name of whatever character I was, you know. And like, and then when you were writing about the sort of worlds that you would create, or the sort of fantastical elements that you would read into your experience, like that was very reminiscent for me. And even as someone who grew up within a form of evangelicalism in the Midwest instead of the East Coast, that was very resonant. And I was wondering just if that sort of openness and was a way in which later on in your life was one of the first connecting points to this evangelical message.
Yep, 100%. Like, I would say that my open imagination, and then also my willingness to sort of like incorporate different things into my imagination, but also like my desire to like find community and belonging, and feeling sort of like rejected by the world around me in a lot of ways, because I just didn't feel like I was like everyone else, like, necessarily. Like, I think that all of those things in combination, like, definitely made me sort of like ripe for the picking in certain ways. But like, but the imaginative element of it, like, and like, honestly, like, I just wasn't like very like, I was closed to certain things and I was open to other things. Like, and it was the combination of what I was closed to and what I was opened to that really made me like particularly vulnerable, as well as like the vulnerabilities of like traumas that I had like in my own childhood and the needs that I had at that moment, you know. Like, I was very like closed to the idea of drugs and drinking and like, you know, and sex. Like, I was very like afraid of all of those things, because those things to me communicated a lack of control and like the inability to have a safe adult life. Like, that's what I felt like I saw. We also, came of age at a time where it was very much like, I remember like the DARE program was in schools and everything
Oh
was just
yeah.
like, drugs and drinking is like the devil, like no marijuana ever, like you smoke weed, you die. Just like, all of that messaging was just like all around us at all times. And like, how does a young brain handle that? Like, to me, my young brain handled that by being like, I can't be a safe adult who can function in the world if I do any of that stuff. And then all of a sudden I get thrown into college and everyone's like, oh, in college, all you're going to do is drugs and drink and have sex and join a sorority. And it's all going to. So to me, it was just like college is unsafe. It was just like red alarms going off in my head about college. Like, but then so all of that stuff was bad. But then on the other hand, like I did have, again, this expansive imagination and this like curiosity about the spiritual world. Like when I was in high school, I dabbled in Wicca, like with one of my friends. Like, I walked around a circle and chanted earth, air, fire, water. And I was very like interested in the idea of paganism and like, of there being like different spiritual forces. So I was like, kind of like what evangelicalism definitely called like a seeker. Like when I look at like the Cru methodology in terms of converting people, like they sort of like, place people on a spiritual scale. And I was on the spiritual scale of like a seeker, which meant that I was like very much somebody that they wanted to go after. They saw that I was open to different spiritual ideas and they wanted to influence those beliefs and guide them into like a certain, vein. So they kind of like hit the jackpot with me because I was so afraid of like all of the things that they also were afraid of. And they also like barred people from to control them. But for me, I was like, I want control in my life. I didn't necessarily want to be controlled, but I wanted to be given control. And that paired with the idea that they believed in a spiritual realm and they had a framework for that, like ended up being like very attractive to me.
Yeah. So talk about that a little more, because that is the focus of your book, is your experience within Campus Crusade, now called Cru. It's one of many church or parachurch organizations that's gone through name changes to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
so Campus Crusade used to be called Campus Crusade for Christ, and now it's just called Cru. Another one is like YWAM, which I think a lot of them may say doesn't really mean anything.
No.
Like that's the official rule. If I'm thinking of the right organization,
Yeah.
There's one or two more that have had similar rebranding efforts, which speaks to the sort of marketing methodology that a lot of this has.
Sophisticated.
Absolutely.
It's
Yes,
sadly
absolutely.
sophisticated.
Absolutely. This is a sidebar, but there's a wonderful book called Guaranteed Pure. It's a history of Moody Bible Institute, and it's all about the establishment of corporate evangelicals.
Oh my goodness, that's fascinating.
And
I would love to read that.
Yeah, it's by Timothy Gloge. I'm working on my own book right now, and I'm leaning a lot on that book for some parts of establishing the framework, because I'm allowing this little bit of sidebar tangent because I know that you're in the marketing area. That's also been part of my professional career too. Yeah. So it's really, really fascinating. And I would totally recommend it, because these things have been established for way longer than we think.
Yeah.
So getting back to your text, you talked about how you were going to a secular school, but then Campus Crusade had a presence. I mean, I'm betraying my own experience. I went to a Christian school, so everything was like Cru for me, in a way.
Every day.
but you were at a a secular school with air quotes, with this Cru presence, and then you really delve very deeply into this relationship you have with a fellow student named Kate. So how what was your initial introduction, and then what got you very enthused, we would say on fire for God, type.
So on fire, man. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So my initial introduction to Cru actually was not through Kate. It was through a girl who I found to be far creepier. Her
Oh
name was
God.
her name was Tara, but she love bombed me, and I liked that. I found love bombing to be very nice, like because
Hmm.
I was terrified that no one would ever love me. So I was in like freshman orientation, and there were a bunch of like sort of like staff members who were also fellow students who were older than me in freshman orientation, and they decided to play a game of never have I ever, and they were like, never have I ever had sex in a hot tub, and everyone was like raising their hands because apparently they all had, like, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I'm so scared. And I like basically I just couldn't handle, like, it just all felt like so out of control for me, and I just felt like I was just gonna be like thrown into this world of like drug-based iniquity. Like I was just so terrified. Like, so I ended up like going downstairs in the student center, like telling some lady that I was scared, and like one of like the teachers or whatever. And then this woman, Tara, was like listening, like, and she was actually the president of Campus Crusade, of the Campus Crusade chapter on my campus, which had been started by her. So the thing about Campus Crusade and the Navigators and InterVarsity and all of these like organizations like on college campuses that is really fascinating and disturbing is that like they don't like naturally just exist on college campuses. College campuses don't invite them on. These are like adult non-student staff members who find their ways onto campuses and then start converting students or start identifying students who are already like believers, like who are already evangelical, and then convincing them to start chapters. So it's kind of gross. Like it's not the students' ideas generally. Like it is like a literal infiltration of this like evangelical corporation, like wandering onto a college campus and then like getting like themselves established on it. And so that had happened with the Croup chapter on my college campus maybe a year or two before I arrived. So Tara was in like absolute ultimate recruitment mode. Like she wanted to get this group like charged up. She wanted to get it big. And then she heard me like being scared over there. And she was like, this girl is perfect for like my group. Like this girl is everything that we want. This girl is right for the picking. And so she was like, hey, I'm part of a group that doesn't smoke, drink, or have sex. And I was like, sign me up, which is just not what other college students think at all, or at least what I think they think. But for me, like, and, you know, honestly, maybe for like other kids, like, you know, who are like looking for like a certain amount of control, or who are like kind of feeling like they're not ready for all of those things that just feel so like adult, like, or even just like they don't want to handle all that stuff, like other straight edge kids, like that sounded attractive to me.
Hmm.
So
yeah, because there are kids that don't want to do that, right? There are.
yeah, there
Yeah.
are. There are kids. Again, like, yeah, again, growing up, the whole straight edge movement, like there
Yep.
were like
Yep.
other kids who like didn't want to like, you know, who didn't want to do that stuff. So and it might feel difficult for them to find other people who feel the same way. And for me, she tells me that it's a Christian group, that they don't smoke, drink, or have sex. And I was like, okay, well, I'm Christian because I grew up Catholic. So this goes back to the conversation we had previously about not being able to distinguish fundamentalism
Hmm.
naturally in our culture from anything else, like from any other version or form of Christianity. And I don't want to do these things, so sign me up. So I showed up at like the first meeting. And in that meeting was a girl that I had met previously at during like another class of mine, and her name was Kate. Now, Kate looked to me like the coolest, most like rational, most like calm and collected and interesting girl that I had seen at college so far. She almost sort of like exuded a confidence in how just like natural she was, like in every way, shape, and form. Like I found her to be like, I like found myself to feel like simultaneously jealous of her, like just in viewing her as a human being, and absolutely fascinating. And she was there at this meeting. Now, like Tara had been there, had, you know, brought me in earlier, and she was just like, girl, I love you. You're so cool. You're so great. And she didn't know me. And I found that to be a little weird, but also I was like, I mean, at least someone loves me. So I guess I'll hang out with her. And then like, but then all of a sudden Kate is there, this girl who like seems like the coolest person I've met so far, and I don't even know how to handle how cool she is. And she's there at this like Christian meeting, and she's like reading from the Bible. And I was just like, that's interesting. I want to know more about her. I want to know more about what she thinks. I want to know more about what she believes. And her and I turned out like had a lot in common. Like we liked the same movies. Like she liked Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia. Like, and she loved Dickens. Like she loved all of the weird little things that I loved. And we ended up just becoming like really, really good friends just based off of our interests. Like her like weirdness sort of like matched my weirdness, but the difference is that she had a confidence that I had never had, like ever had, like, and I wanted that confidence. And according to her, that confidence was all because of God. So that's what that's what sort of like led me down the slippery slope as I got to know.
Yes. Yes. White evangelicalism is the slippery slope, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and then so, I mean, I think this is the thing about these groups, right? Is they give you ready-made belonging. It's very similar to the way a lot of evangelical youth groups function.
Yeah.
You're given this level of safety, but a degree of autonomy. But how once you started exploring this space and this particular identity, like when did you start to really be able to sense the boundaries that were there, like between you and the greater like student population? And was it something that you felt you could do, or was your sort of, worldview just sort of rewritten, and then you saw everything as as a mission field? And I'm not saying it has to be either or. It might.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about your response.
Yeah, my worldview was on the surface rewritten, I would say, like pretty much like, if you think of if we do a Shrek analogy and like a human being is an onion, like all the outer layers were rewritten, but the core wasn't quite. And the core is what I struggled with like for the rest of my time in evangelicalism. Like, so like I learned. And the other thing about that I think is important about this conversation, important about the idea of these like these again college youth groups, these groups that exist on college campuses, and even just like anyone in the way evangelical converts anyone of any age, is that conversion does not happen generally like in a split second. Like evangelicals walking up to people on beaches with tract booklets or going up to people and knocking on doors, like that's really not, in my opinion, that's not about converting anyone. That's just about like getting the people who are trying to do the conversion more deeply ingrained in your group, because they're humiliating themselves for the cause. And humiliation is a really good way, I think, of like getting people to like stay in your group. So but for me, the course of my conversion like happened like over a year. And it was like Kate sort of like very like subtly planting a lot of different seeds in my mind and getting me to think about things in different ways and shaming me for certain thoughts. It's like, and I really, again, she was so confident. She was so interesting. She was so cool. I wanted to be like her. When I disagreed with her, like it would be like pretty vehement, like it would be a really like, strong disagreement. And I didn't walk away feeling good from it. I walked away questioning myself, like, because she was so sure and I was so unsure of myself. Like, and so like it took like a year for me to get to the point where I accepted Jesus Christ like as Lord and Savior with her. Like, and in a lot of ways, like I did it because I wanted to be like her. And I sort of over a year sussed out that the only chance I had of being as confident as her and like having like sort of the stable adulthood that I could sense that she was going to have was if I bought into this. And also just like, I loved her. Like I had a huge crush on her. Like I wanted her to love me the most, like out of everybody that she was around. And I knew that if I did this, I would please her in that way. And so I accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And then she started shopping me around to people to confirm my conversion and also to get me even deeper in. So this is what's so sophisticated about like organizations like Cru, and also like beyond all of the marketing, which is very sophisticated in itself, they are also a well-oiled machine once you get into it. So she brings me in and then she shops me around to all of the people. She brings me to a pastor, she brings me to a Cru staff member, and they start asking me questions to confirm that the Holy Spirit has taken over my heart and I now am a true believer. And I believe the number one thing, which is that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior, and the only way you get to heaven is by believing in him. No other religions, no other gods, no other thought processes, no agnosticism, no cafeteria Catholicism, no cafeteria anything. Only that. Like, and I remember having like one such conversation with a Cru staff member, and I wasn't actually really ready to give in to that idea. And it was because of my mother. Like, it was because of the idea of my mother seeing her brother when he was a spirit person, like after he died, like, and still believing her about that, like, and still like not being ready to say, if my mother doesn't believe this about life after death, she's going to go to hell. Like, I just wasn't ready to do it. And that Cru staff member laid that law down with me, and she made it very final. And she was like, no, your mother is not going to heaven if she does not believe in this. Belief in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior is the only way to heaven. That is it. And that was, you know, that Cru staff member drew a boundary. And that boundary was between like me and like the life that I had lived before, and then Kate and everything about the life that I wanted with her, like as her best friend, as her favorite person, and this entire community that she was introducing me to, like this built-in beautiful community of like a promising, thriving adulthood. Like, what was I going to do? Like, I wasn't going to sit there and be like, yeah, I'll go take like my like destitute life over here that I'm just perpetually confused about and terrified of, like, or be in the safety of this community with the most interesting, beautiful, confident person I've ever met in my life, you know? Like, I think I chose like what any person at my mental space at that point in time and my experience level would have chosen, which is sad. Like, it's really sad because in some ways I look at it and I'm like, would I have chosen it if I could have really seen what was happening? If I had had the education that I have now about groups like Cru and about evangelical Christianity, and if I had been like, you know, told about the difference between fundamentalism and the rest of Christianity, if I could have really understood what I was looking at, would I have chosen it? So I wish I wouldn't, but like,
yeah, but at the same time, you had the information you had, and I think the fact that you have poured so much into this memoir of revealing and thinking through some of the things that you did while you were in evangelicalism, including witnessing to your family and like these types of things that I think a lot of us who've passed through these moments in our own lives can really, really relate to. I know I said some cringe things, and had like, I was the most fundamentalist of everybody in my family at different points.
Yeah.
And I mean those are parts of the story. And I'm glad that you kept them in, because I mean, that's part of it is being able to see that from the other side but also recognizing where you were, because there does seem to be this, you know, this pull between really desiring that community, really desiring that acceptance, but then you know, anytime you have these doubts about the sorts of standards that you feel are unfair, or the conditions, the terms and conditions of it all, like that's when this whole deconstruction type thing that people have been talking about with this with this recent language,
it's so good to have a word for it.
Like, yeah, absolutely. So before we get to that sort of stage of things, I mean, you were absolutely all in. You share, your some of the ways you were writing in journals and using that very evangelical practice, and then started witnessing and trying to bring your family members to evangelical churches. For that period of your time, especially your college years before you move on to grad school and beyond that, was had that motivation by then sort of taken over of it becoming this, spiritual warfare type, life or death, salvation at all costs?
Mm-hmm.
Did that feel like the dominating motivation for you during your college years?
Yeah. Yeah. During my college years, I would say yes, because of the fact that like literally everything, what a pressure to feel in your life. Let me just say,
Absolutely.
like what
Absolutely.
an immense pressure to feel on your shoulders that like if you do not witness to your family members, they will suffer for eternity in hell. They will not go to heaven with you. Like the people that you love most in the world and everybody that you love afterwards who does not believe in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, like that was probably the crux of my depression, like the crux of my anxiety. But it was also a driving force. It was a mission. Like they call it missional, like for a
Mm-hmm.
reason. Like it really is a mission. It's a reason to wake up in the morning. It's a reason to do anything that you're doing. And for me, because honestly, I felt so jealous of people who grew up in evangelical families when I was evangelical, because at least like they knew that their family members were going to heaven. Like at least they didn't have to live every day with the burden that I felt like I had to live with, which Calvinism, like a separate practice, told me that I didn't have to live with the burden because it was God who would save them ultimately, and I just needed to be the witness. But even if I needed to do anything, that was a burden, you know? And then the idea that like God might not save them, that they might not be the elect, that they might not be chosen was absolutely terrifying and made me hate God. Like, so it
Mm-hmm.
was just like, it's like, it was like a dominating, like witnessing to them and trying to get them to see the world from my new, like, evangelical perspective was absolutely a dominating force in my life throughout my college years and beyond. And it was also the force that made me not know how to live in this world like as much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it was it was painful. It was awful. It was pretty torturous. And I would say when I was finally able to let go of it, it was the greatest relief I've ever felt still to this day.
Hmm. Hmm. Gonna sit with that for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and this is going to be this is definitely going to be a different direction. So not building off of your last comment, but a little bit of a different direction. One of the things that I was really um, was really interested by in your text was that much of your crew experience that you talk about is by and large a lot of women in leadership, and you talk about how that was just because there were no men that were part of it, and that even though like you believed in complementarian theology, there was no way to functionally practice it because guys weren't around for
Yeah.
by and large. Um, at the same time, though, the your experience, like other women were the enforcers of purity culture, of
Mhm.
complementarianism, of gender roles, of gender norms. And I was curious if you could elaborate on that. And if I'm wrong, please let me know. But that's what it seemed to be, is that even though this was a space where a lot of men weren't necessarily always calling the shots, there was still this internal worldview, that this complementarian view that sees women as submissive or that sort of thing. So if you could elaborate on that, and again, if I'm wrong, please let me know.
No, you are 100% correct, and it is a really fascinating part of like my experience in particular, and the way my crew movement operated, and the way that Kate operated as well. Because yeah, like my crew movement like suffered from just this supreme lack of male leadership, as they would have said, because it was like Kate was running the show after Tara graduated. And even when Tara graduated, she kind of came back. I, said in my book, she was like a student lady version of Van Wilder. Like she came back onto campus, and she was like the staff member. She was the new crew staff member because she just couldn't stay away. And then, yeah, like, and then I had other friends like who were also like women who were, helping like us all run the show. And I remember Kate saying at one point in time, one of my friends was dating a man from another college campus, and he came to one of our Bible studies and just started just insulting the way that we were doing things, like because we were women and he would have done it differently and blah, blah, blah. And I remember and I said this in my book, I was just so upset that he would ever come in and like, because granted, as messed up as everything with Kate was, Kate knew how to run a fucking Bible study. Like, Kate fucking knew how to get in there and just brainwash the hell out of everybody. She was great at it. She was so good at it. Like, and this guy comes in and he's like acting like he could brainwash anybody better. No, he could absolutely not. Like, he was awful. Like, and he really sucked. Like, I wanted my friend to break up with him that second, and she didn't. She ended up marrying him, which is totally bonkers. But anyway, so like Kate, and Kate, like he was insulting Kate. And then Kate just she didn't take it, but the way that she responded to it all to me is, something? He's right. Men should be leading this. Men should be the ones, but I have to do the best with what I have because there are no men to do this. Mm-hmm. And I remember just being like, what? Like, again, she was so good at what she was doing. The terrible stuff she was doing, she was so good at it. And no dude could have done that any better than her. Like, but in her mind, like she wasn't fit for it. She wasn't, her gender, like did not like call for her to be in that role, but she was doing the best she could with what she had, and I remember like that was sort of like a point of contention in my own mind, just like, like when I talk about the onion, the Shrek onion, like of like what I believed in, like at the core of me, that was something that I really struggled with as well. Like was this idea that like women didn't belong in leadership roles, or women should only be leaders over other women. They shouldn't be leaders over men. Like women should just be setting up snack tables and teaching children's church and like doing all that stuff and being women's pastors, which is just pastors over the women, but they shouldn't be ever teaching or leading men in any way. Like Kate was such a strong force that it really, and also I felt like I could be a strong force too. Like, and like, it really just, it at the center of me, I questioned it. Like, just like I questioned like all the gay stuff, like all this stuff, because I never, the gay stuff, the gay teachings of evangelicalism, anti-LGBTQ stuff never sat right with me. Did I buy into it reluctantly and begrudgingly? Absolutely. Like I absolutely did, because I felt like I needed to fit into this mold. Like, was I still bisexual on the inside and did I know it? Yes. And I was terrified of it. And it was the thing that I was most scared of about myself. Like, but like all of those things still sat in the center of me, and I questioned it. Like, and like when it came to like women in leadership, like, yeah, like there were a lot of like really, and it wasn't just Kate, like there were other crew staff members that were just like incredible speakers, like so good. And just like, and I remember they were like married to these men who they were supposed to be submitting to in marriage. And we would have these like women's times, because in evangelicalism, they do that thing where they're just like, okay, like the men go off into a room and talk about masturbation and pornography or whatever you talk about. Because that's what, as women, that's what we thought all the men talked about. We thought they just went off and just talked about like trying not to jerk off. Like, whereas like women, we had to like go into a room and we had to be like, okay, well, I need to stop fantasizing about getting married. Like, that's what I need to do. And I was like, I need to stop jerking off too. And everyone was like, no one wants to, no one else is struggling with that. Just you. And during these women's times, we would have these incredible women like come in and just like, oh my God, just like take over the room. They were so fascinating. And they were so good at the brainwashing they were doing. But the men they were married to, They would talk about in these women times about how they struggled with submitting to the men they were married to because they were such powerful women, but about how they were still called to do it and they still had to do it. And in that way, and in all of the other ways, when they sent us emails telling us to go on these beach trips and cover up for the men and all this stuff, they just perpetuated this like cis white male theology, and like they suppressed themselves, like, you know, in the name of what they were buying into. So
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. It's endlessly fascinating. Like
Yeah.
looking at that.
Yeah.
Like,
And it is really that the gender politics of evangelicalism is just, um, it's just so constricting for everyone. It doesn't make space for any sort of expansiveness, for any sort of deviation from a very sort of, at the same
mhm,
time, very prescribed norm. But then, you know, I won't even say it's ambivalent. Like, it is very clear
mhm,
for men and women, and the expectations are, like, that's why reading somebody like Bell Hooks is going to blow some evangelical's mind, like,
yeah,
or former evangelical's mind, and that's having just
yeah,
finished reading The Will to Change, like that. You know,
yeah,
that's like
yeah.
that type of gender expectation, especially within fundamentalist evangelicalism, is so pervasive that
Yeah.
even when the other gender isn't there to enforce it,
Hmm.
um
The women are enforcing it.
yeah, and in male spaces, like the men will enforce it, and they
Hmm.
are given more power, and
Hmm.
but at the same but they're given more power and seemingly authority, but that to claim that, they have to sacrifice parts of themselves too.
Yeah.
It's not the same. I'm not saying it's the
Hmm.
same.
Yeah, yeah,
But the fact that these gender things are so pervasive, that even in single gender space, using that binary and like evangelical norm,
yeah. Hmm.
they're still there, and
Yeah,
it's a really fascinating look at how these things actually play out in
yeah,
people's lives, instead of
yeah.
just
It
talking
makes
about
me,
it in these
yeah,
abstract ways.
yeah. It makes me think about like women like Kate and some of those crew staff members, like what they could have been without evangelicalism, like how incredible they would have been, like
Hmm.
without evangelicalism constricting them, like all those like powers, like if they could have used them for good, like, you know, it's like what would those women have been like? And it also makes me think of a theory that I remember having in evangelicalism to try to rationalize why women weren't allowed to lead, why women were like kept in these like subjugated essentially.
Hmm.
And I remember telling Kate one time, I was like, I think I figured it out. I think I figured out why God doesn't want us as women to be leaders. Like, and Kate was like, what? What's your theory? What's your theory? And I was like, I think it's because we want to be leaders. Like, and maybe men don't. I was like, maybe like God has to subjugate us because we want to like be leaders. And he's like, you don't get what you want, like, you know, because like you want it too bad and you have to, for me, give up the thing that you want the most. Like, just like Abraham was like asked to sacrifice his son. Like, and maybe for men, they have to give up being like wanting to like sit back. And I look at that now and I'm like, that's totally fucked up. There's lots of men who want to lead. There's lots
Yeah,
of men who very willingly want power and want to grab onto it. But in my mind, I was just trying to understand like
sure.
why God would do this to me, like why God would do this to my friends, like why it would be like, you know, a viable practice like for us. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, yeah. And the other piece that I felt that I think a lot of people who've had experience in evangelicalism will find very relatable is, um, you were in this very close knit group in crew for
yeah,
years, and then you graduate, and then it's just then there's a vacuum.
yeah,
Um, and like I can't credit where I first heard this, but the term holy ghosted,
hmm,
of like, you had these very vulnerable codependent relationships with a lot of people, and then overnight they can disappear. um, that is sort of expressed in when you move to New York for grad school and your years after that, and your own experiences, with dating and everything else that happened in that section of your book. Um, what I what was it about moving to New York, and having both that like sort of physical distance and that lack of proximity, that um, had that made a space for you to feel like you were ready for the things you weren't ready for in college, like drugs and
Yeah.
dating and addressing your desire for companionship and sexuality and everything else? Like, was it the moving away? Because people within evangelicalism see that as a threat, right? They see
Hmm.
like you need to be in the community at all times. It needs to
Yeah.
be, in but not of the world. Maintain that boundary. So what was it about that part of your life that started to open your worldview back up out to a place outside of evangelicalism?
Yeah. I think it was allowing myself to finally have friends that did not believe what I believed in terms
Mm.
of evangelicalism. It was, and also like Kate, I can't like Kate not being around anymore. And this is like one of the things I owe to her in terms of me getting out of evangelicalism was how terrible she was at keeping in touch. She was awful at it. Like she like could not return a phone call or a text message for the life of her. And I'm so lucky for that because of the fact that like because she was just so bad at like, at communicating, like when you weren't right in front of her face, like she was again the driving force that in many ways kept me inside of it. So when she wasn't there anymore, and then all of a sudden I was allowing myself to make friends with people who were outside of the movement, like, and not just outside of the movement, but also like really interesting and really confident, but also like I started to like be interested in people who were questioning the world around them. I started to
Mm-hmm.
be interested in people who weren't so sure about things. Like when I was like 18, 19, and I met Kate, the fact that she was so sure was really attractive to me because I needed that. But then all of a sudden, when I was like, 23, 24, and I was meeting like all of these other people in New York City, the fact that they weren't sure, but were like living anyways, like I found that interesting. So in some ways, maybe it was also like the development of my own brain, like
Oh
as like,
yeah,
somebody
yeah.
who's like growing up. And in a lot of ways, like I think of my book as a coming of age story. It's a coming of age story with evangelicalism being just thrown into the mix and how that affects like a young person because like one of the wonderful people who helped edit my book at like an earlier stage, Lauren O'Neill, actually.
Mm-hmm.
One of the
Sunday
things
school
that
dropouts. Shout out.
I know, right? Lauren O'Neill, I cannot tell you how much I love her. Like she's so good and she's such a great editor. But like one of the things she had said, like in the margins when she was editing, was she highlighted something and she goes, "This strikes me as something a young person thinks." And I've never forgotten that because I'm like, I feel like that's this entire book. This is how a young person thinks. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is how a young person thinks. And then like what happens when you throw a fundamentalist like theology into it? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like how that affects like, the brain of young person. Like, and so like as my brain started growing up and started realizing like, actually, I don't have answers and I'm finding comfort in that. Like, and I'm finding it interesting when other people don't have answers too. Like, I think that started to be kind of what saved me. But also like just being in New York and like being around people who just like swore all the time and also trying to convert them. That was the other thing that really like kicked evangelicalism into the bucket for me. Like was like I was doing what evangelicalism told me to do, which was trying to convert everyone around me. And it's what they wanted me to do because they wanted, especially Crew and especially the church that I was in, wanted more people like me. Like they wanted like me to like multiply myself, like essentially like they
Mm-hmm.
wanted like more like theater majory artistic people to come in and create like evangelical media, like, and
Yeah,
so they
yeah.
were very into me doing this. So,
Did you have to do a book study on Heart of the Artist or anything like
oh,
that?
oh my god, I remember Heart of the Artist. They tried to make me do it, but I could never concentrate on
It
Heart of
was
the Artist.
it was a very poorly written book.
It was, yeah,
It was bad.
I did not connect with it at all. But did they try to make me do it? 100% of the
Yeah.
way. Like, and did they try to make me write like, fiction based off of biblical stories? 100%. Did I want to? No, never, not in a million years. Like, and so, yeah, I think that, trying to convert these people and like really like delving into their lives, like of my like existentialist grad school friends, like really fucked with my evangelicalism, because like I was like asking them questions and trying to get to know them and trying to like delve into the deepest parts of their hearts. And then I just delving into them made me just question myself more, because I realized like they were kind of happy. They were kind of okay. Like they were like, sure, they didn't have like any type of certainty. And yet they were hot messes, but they were all right. And that like, you know,
Yeah.
seeing that people could be a hot mess, but okay, was like,
Yeah.
all of a sudden that just, it blew my mind. And it was really good for me.
Right. Yeah. Seeing, yeah. Yeah. That's always fascinating when you start to see that like you're supposed to have this freedom in Christ, but these other people, you envy their freedom. Like you envy
Mm-hmm.
they seem comfortable in themselves in a way that I think evangelicalism always wants you to battle yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And that's definitely like whenever you see someone at ease in themselves outside of evangelicalism, that's going to make you pay attention,
Yeah.
you know? So,
Yeah.
um, your, it, and there's lots of parts of your book that we haven't touched on. There's some really, um, you talk about your family dynamics, which we haven't really gone into at all. Some really wonderful things there. But just to close out the short conversation that we're having now, um, it seemed like your years outside of crew, this period of like seeing other people, getting to know them outside of just strictly evangelical spaces, it led to a point where you one day just sort of you decided that you like this is not for me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So did it feel um that decisive, that um like you made a singular choice one day after ruminating on it for a while, that this is no longer serving me and I'm not going to serve it?
Yeah. Yeah. It honestly, it felt like the way that I've always, I can't describe it any other way other than it felt like I was waking up from a dream. Like it was just
Mm,
like, just as slowly as they had converted me over the course of a year, I slowly was deconverting, like over the course of, I would say about 2 years. Like it was just like the layer upon layer upon layer. I was just coming up out of it and just realizing like, more and more like this is not real and this is not real and this is not real, and also I don't feel this way anymore, this way anymore, this way anymore. Like it just was like I was like coming to like back to myself into like another state of consciousness, and I sort of like met myself, who I was before I entered evangelicalism, on the other side. And I was able to like hold a hand out to her and be like, I know you're scared, I know you're terrified about being an adult, I know that you're afraid that you can't do this and that you can't do this safely, but I think I know how we can do it together now. Like, I think
mm,
I know how we can be safe in this world now. Like, and I don't think that we need this anymore. In fact, I think it's hurting us really, really badly. Like, and I don't think we can live this way anymore. And in fact, I think that if we do continue trying to live this way, we will really not be safe. Like, we're not safe here. Like, and we need to get out of this. Like, and yeah, and it was like all of a sudden, I think for 7 years, for the 7 years I was inside of the movement, I felt like I didn't have a choice and I had to stay because this was real and this was reality. And this was the only way I was going to have that safe adulthood. And then all of a sudden, one day, as I woke up out of that dream and met myself on the other side, it was a split second when I realized I had a choice and I didn't have to do this anymore. Like, that this was a choice. Like that this was like, it wasn't something that had taken over me. There was no spirit inside of me. There was no Calvinism keeping me inside of it. There was nothing. Like, I was choosing and I could choose differently. And that was okay. And it was okay to start over again. Not
mm-hmm.
going to say it was an easy decision. It was a really tough one. Like after giving myself to this for 7 years and after like humiliating myself in front of people and like literally just like living my life as if this was the truest thing ever and ostracizing people around me, like that was a big decision. And all the people that I had gained and all of the friends I had made and all the, like the entire community I would have to leave behind, like it was awful. Like, it was awful. I don't wish it upon anyone, like, to
Mm-hmm.
leave evangelicalism. It's terrible. It's a terrible experience, and it's a very isolating experience, and it's the antithesis of everything that you experience inside of it, like, in those ways. Like, but yeah, it was like one day I just realized I had a choice, like, and it
Mm-hmm.
was the best decision I've ever made.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you decided to revisit this period of your life. I think it's great that you've decided to share this, because it's vulnerable stuff. I what was it that this is really, I think, will be our closing question. Um, Despite all this time out and sort of reestablishing and re-meeting yourself after this period within evangelicalism, what made you want to revisit this time and share it so publicly through a book that will have its own lifespan? Now it's it's an artifact. It's in its own way, it's a testimony to your experience, right?
Um,
Um,
I love that you said that, and I love that you asked that question. Oh God, it's like, yeah, it's almost as if I claimed my testimony again, which is like, for so long I was like being forced to go out and give my testimony of evangelicalism to people, but being able to do this was just like, it was like I got to claim my testimony again. So that was probably one reason why I did it.
mhm,
But one of the other reasons why, so yeah, it was a reclamation, but like one of the other reasons why I did it was that I felt like no one was talking about evangelicalism in the way that it needs to be talked about, at least like not on like a grander sphere. Like, we've had like our group that's been talking about it, right? Like, and that's like, and everything that we've been doing is really important. But what I see media at large focusing on is the little teeny tiny cults that come as offshoots of evangelicalism. We've got like, like the Way Down, like HBO series. You've got like, the Gwen Shamlins of the world. You've got like the Fred Phelps, the Westboro Baptist Churchers. Like, you've got like all of these like smaller like evangelical offshoots, and they're like, look at the cults. Oh my God, look at the weird little cults. But nobody's talking about like the framework of evangelicalism that creates these cults, and that is really like not a cult because it's too large and too expansive, but is in so many ways like has all of those properties, like this high control group. And I felt like I've got to talk about the big cojones, like like the main guy here. Like, it's like, and like, not enough people are talking about it, so I'm going to throw my story into the ring. And
mhm,
also I wanted to talk about these vulnerable college years, because I felt like, not just again what we were talking about earlier with like the idea of like, nobody understanding like the difference between regular Christianity and fundamentalism, but also nobody understanding that like there are bigger things threatening like young vulnerable college students like than fraternities and sororities. Like, everyone's like, watch out for those girls who are going to try to make you jump off a bridge for entrance into their social circle. Watch out for those boys that are going to try to get everyone drunk and do all this stuff. Like, everybody's like, those college years, people are warning you about the wrong stuff. Like, they're not warning you about like, watch out for the psychologically manipulative people that are going to like try to like get you into their high control group. Like, it's like, no one's like, it's like talking about those years are so vulnerable, and people are trying to find themselves that, and there are so many different forces when you get onto a college campus that are going to try to draw your attention and draw your loyalty. Like,
mhm,
and people are talking about a bunch of those other things, but no one's talking about this one. Like,
mhm.
and so like I wanted to give it some color. Like,
Yeah.
the idea, the name Campus Crusade for Christ, or the Navigators, or InterVarsity, I'll say them all. Like, all of those names are not known enough. Like, they're just these like weird little groups that like people sometimes have like, tangential relationships with in college, but they're actually really insidious and really dangerous. And they're large organizations that are sort of rooted in our culture and are doing
Yeah.
nasty things. And I want more people to know about them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's a fantastic entry into that space, and um, revealing just how these things work and the impact it had on your life and the life of your family and so many other people. Um, so I was very pleased to read it. Really enjoyed being able to talk to you a bit about it, and I just to build on. I do think, like, even though a lot of us have started talking about distancing ourselves from particular types of religion, um, there is still a little bit of shame that we internalize and keep to ourselves, that like we shouldn't be proud of this growth that we've had, because we've like deconverted, and that still has like a negative connotation. But I think books like yours help, ameliorate that and speak to that, and be like, no, you should be proud of these things. You changed, and you know better now, and you're paying it forward.
You're paying it forward, and you did a brave thing. There is life on the other side of evangelicalism, and it's a good life. And at the same time, it's okay to start over. It's okay. It's really hard, but it's really good. And it's the bravest thing you can do. Really staying in this toxic faith system, they want to convince you that being in it is brave, but really getting out of it, is a very brave thing to do. And you should be proud of yourself for it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, the book is God's Ex-Girlfriend, a memoir about loving and leaving the evangelical Jesus. Beth, thank you very much for joining me to talk about it. Was there anything else you wanted to mention here to plug?
Oh, I have talked about so much. I've talked your ear off. So, thank you so much for having me. I love Exvangelical. I've been a big fan for a long time. This podcast is one of the things that helped me come out of it, and realizing that there was community. And so thank you for creating it.
Thank you very much. And thank you for talking today.
Of course.
That'll do it for today's episode. Thank you very much for listening. This episode was produced by me, Blake Chastain. You can find all my other writing and podcasting over at postevangelicalpost.com, and you can support the show for just $5 a month or subscribe for free over at postevangelicalpost.com/support.